Her name was Ankhesenamun. She was around 23 years old, and she was alone in a way that is hard to explain. Her husband had just died. Her children, 2 tiny daughters, had died before him. Her mother, the great Nefertiti, was gone. Her father, the Pharaoh Akhenaten, was gone. One by one, everyone she had belonged to had disappeared. And now the most powerful men in Egypt were moving toward her, not to comfort her, to control her. Whoever married her would become Pharaoh. She knew that. They knew that. And she had very little time. So she did something that had never been done before. She called for a trusted royal writer, someone close to her, someone she knew would not betray her. She spoke her words carefully, in secret, and she pressed them, letter by letter, into a small, wet clay tablet using the wedge-shaped writing that rulers across the ancient world used to speak to each other. That tablet was then carried across hundreds of miles of desert, not to an ally, not to a friend, but to the court of Egypt's greatest enemy. The words on it still exist. They are still readable 3,000 years later. And what she asked in that letter, no Egyptian queen had ever asked anything like it, not once. Not in 3,000 years of pharaohs and queens and dynasties. This is the story of that letter, and the woman brave enough to write it. If this is the kind of story you love, please subscribe and stay with us. There are many more stories like this one waiting for you. 1. The girl the sun god claimed. She was not always Ankhesenamun. She was born with a different name, Ankhesenamun. It meant she lives through the Aten. The Aten was the sun. The one god her father Akhenaten had decided was the only god that mattered. He had torn down the old religion of Egypt and built a new one. He had closed the temples. He had silenced the priests. He had moved the entire court to a brand new city in the desert. A city he built himself, just for his god, and called it Akhenaten. That was where she grew up. The city Akhenaten, which we now call Amarna, was unlike anything Egypt had seen before. It sat between cliffs and the Nile, and it was full of light. The palace walls were painted with birds and flowers. The sun was everywhere, and at the center of everything was her family, her father, her mother Nefertiti, and 5 sisters. You can still see them today, carved into the walls of Amarna, Akhenaten and Nefertiti sitting together, their daughters climbing into their laps, the golden rays of the Aten reaching down over all of them, each ray ending in a tiny hand, offering the symbol of life. It looks in those carvings like the warmest family in the ancient world, but the world outside those walls was not warm. Her father's revolution had made enemies. Powerful priests who had lost everything, generals who thought the old gods were being dishonored, a country that felt deep in its bones that something had gone terribly wrong. She was a little girl in the middle of all of it, and it was already beginning to unravel. 2. Everything that was lost. By the time Ankhesenamun was around 10 years old, the losses had begun. Her sister Akhenaten died. She was the second eldest, depicted in a royal tomb in Amarna with her parents standing over her, their arms raised in grief. That tomb painting is one of the most human things to survive from the ancient world. A pharaoh and his queen bent with sorrow over a child they could not save. Then her father Akhenaten died. The exact cause is unknown, but with him went the revolution he had built. Then Nefertiti, the most powerful woman in Egypt, the mother who had filled those painted walls, she disappeared from the record too. Historians are still not certain how or when she died. The beautiful city of Akhenaten was abandoned. The priests of the old gods came flooding back. The temples of Amun were reopened, and everything connected to Akhenaten, his name, his city, his god, began to be erased. And through all of this, Ankhesenamun married Tutankhamun. He was her half-brother. She was about 13. He was around 9. This was not unusual in the royal families of ancient Egypt. keeping the royal bloodline within the family was considered sacred. But these were two children thrown together at the center of a country in crisis. They changed their names together. Tutankhamun became Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. Ankhesenamun became Ankhesenamun. She lives through Amun. The names were a signal to Egypt. The old gods were back. The revolution was over. And together, they ruled. From the paintings inside Tutankhamun's tomb, it is clear they were close, genuinely close. She is shown standing before him, handing him flowers. She crouches behind him while he hunts, holding arrows. In one carving, she reaches up to touch his chin, a small, tender gesture painted in gold. They had two daughters together. Neither survived. Their tiny, mummified bodies were found in Tutankhamun's tomb. The older one had been born with a condition that twisted her spine. She would not have lived long even if she had been born healthy. Ankhesenamun held two daughters who died. And then, at around 18 years old, Tutankhamun died too. Suddenly, without warning, without an heir. 3. The men closing in. Egypt had a problem. When a pharaoh died without a son, the throne did not simply sit empty. Someone had to take it. And whoever took it had to legitimize that claim, had to show Egypt and the gods that he had the right. The fastest way to do that was to marry the queen. She carried the royal bloodline. She was the daughter of a pharaoh, the granddaughter of a pharaoh, the wife of a pharaoh. Whoever stood beside her became part of that line. Whoever married her became pharaoh. She knew this. She had watched it happen her whole life. Women in her family did not choose their husbands. They were chosen. They were used. They were moved like pieces in a game played by men with more power and far fewer losses. The man moving toward her now was called I. I was Tutankhamun's vizier, his chief advisor, the man who had stood behind the throne and run the real business of government while the young king was still learning. He was old. He was shrewd. She did not want to marry him. We know this not from a painting or a carving. We know it because she said so. In the letter she wrote, "Never shall I pick out a servant of mine and make him my husband." That was how she described I, a servant. In a world where pharaohs were gods, calling a man a servant was about as clear a statement of contempt as it was possible to make. But contempt alone would not save her. She had 70 days. That was the Egyptian mourning period, the time between a pharaoh's death and his burial, while the priests prepared the body and the court decided what came next. 70 days during which she was still queen, still had some standing, still had some power. After that, whatever was coming would arrive. She had to act. 4. The letter. She called a scribe, and she dictated words that, if they were ever discovered, could mean her death. The letter was addressed to Suppiluliuma I, the king of the Hittites, the most powerful ruler in the ancient Near East, the man whose armies had clashed with Egypt for years over the lands of Syria. Egypt and the Hittites were not at war in that moment, but they were not friends either. They were rivals. Two great empires watching each other across the desert. Writing to him at all was extraordinary. No Egyptian queen had ever done it, but what she wrote was more extraordinary still. "My husband has died and I have no sons. They say about you that you have many sons. You might give me one of your sons to become my husband. Never shall I pick out a servant of mine and make him my husband, I'm afraid." Read that again slowly. She was the queen of Egypt, and she was asking the king of her country's greatest rival to send her a prince, a foreign prince, a Hittite, to become Pharaoh of Egypt. Egypt, which had never once placed a foreigner on its throne. Egypt, which considered foreigners to be beneath them. Egypt, whose whole identity was built on the idea that the Pharaoh was divine, descended from the gods, chosen by the land itself. She was offering all of that, the throne of Egypt, to a stranger from an enemy court, because the alternative was I, and she was afraid. Those two words at the end of her letter are the ones that stop you cold when you read them. After everything she had survived, the revolution, the erasure, the losses, the children she buried, After all of it, this young woman sat down and admitted, in writing, that she was afraid. It took extraordinary courage to write that letter. It took even more courage to send it. 5. The king who did not believe her. When the clay tablet arrived at the court of Suppiluliuma, the king was astonished. He could not believe it was real. Hittite records say he was suspicious. He wondered if it was a trick, a trap designed to start a war, to draw a Hittite prince into Egypt where he could be killed or captured. He was a military man. He had not survived decades of conquest by taking things at face value. So he sent an envoy to Egypt to investigate. The envoy went. He met with Ankhesenamun, or her representatives. He returned to Suppiluliuma with confirmation. It was real. The queen was genuine, and she was running out of time. She wrote again, this time with even more urgency. The words recorded in the Hittite archives have a rawness to them that you can feel even now. Had I a son, would I have written about my own and my country's shame to a foreign land? She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew how it looked. An Egyptian queen begging an enemy king, offering the sacred throne of Egypt to a foreigner. She called it shame, her word, not anyone else's. She knew the risk. She knew the cost. She sent the letter anyway. Suppiluliuma finally believed her. He chose his son Zananza, the second youngest of his 5 sons, and sent him south toward Egypt. Think for a moment about what that journey must have felt like. A young Hittite prince riding toward a country that had been his kingdom's rival, to marry a woman he had never met, to sit on the most famous throne in the ancient world. He never arrived. Zananza was killed on the road to Egypt. The Hittite records say it was done by hostile Egyptians. They do not name who gave the order. But the man who took the throne of Egypt immediately after was Ai, the man she had called a servant. 6. The queen who vanished. After Ai was crowned, Ankhesenamun disappears, not slowly, not gradually, completely. There is no tomb for her, no burial objects with her name, no inscriptions from Ai's reign that mention her. On the walls of Ai's own tomb, the place where his life and reign were recorded for eternity, it is not Ankhesenamun who stands beside him as queen. It is his other wife, Te. It is as if she was erased. We do not know how she died. We do not know where she was buried. We do not know if anyone mourned her or if her name was spoken again after the throne was taken. One small object survived, a ring made of blue glass, found centuries later. On it, pressed into the surface, were 2 cartouches, the oval frames that held royal names in ancient Egypt. One cartouche bore the name of Ai, the other bore the name of Ankhesenamun. They were placed side by side. It is the only surviving evidence that she was ever connected to him. Not a tomb, not a monument, not a record of honor or ceremony, a ring. And then, after Ai died, the general Horemheb took the throne and did what powerful men in Egypt had always done with things they found inconvenient. He erased them. The names of Ai and Tutankhamun were chiseled off monuments. The whole Amarna period, Akhenaten's revolution, the brief reign of the boy king, the queen who had tried so hard to survive, was declared a dark chapter that had never happened. Ankhesenamun was not just forgotten, she was unmade, except for the letter. Pressed into clay by a scribe carried across the desert, filed in the Hittite royal archives at a city called Hattusa, and found there thousands of years later by people who had no idea what they were holding. A young woman's words, still readable, still sharp. I am afraid. Here is what stays with me about Ankhesenamun. She had every reason to simply accept what was coming, to bow her head, to marry Ai, to let the men around her decide what her life would be. That is what was expected. That is what the world she lived in had been built to produce. She refused. Not with a sword, not with an army, with a clay tablet and 7 sentences. She took the most dangerous action available to her, and she aimed it directly at the one person in the world who had the power to change her situation. And she told the truth in that letter. The uncomfortable, humiliating truth that she was afraid, and she was desperate, and she needed help. There is something deeply human in that. something that crosses 3,000 years without any difficulty at all. We do not know what happened to her in the end. We may never know. Her tomb is still out there somewhere, or it was destroyed, or it was never built, and she was buried without ceremony by people who needed her gone. But the letter survived. That matters. So, I want to ask you something. If Zananza had arrived safely in Egypt, what do you think would have happened? Would Ankhesenamun have been safe? Would a Hittite prince on the Egyptian throne have changed everything, or just created a different kind of danger? Leave your answer below. I genuinely want to know what you think. There are more stories like this one. People from the ancient world who did something impossible, something brave, something that the history books almost forgot. Come back for the next one. And if this story moved you, if you felt something for this young woman who tried so hard to save herself, share it with someone who loves history. Like, subscribe, and stay with us. She deserved to be remembered.